Remember this. You get to decide what relationships in your life are toxic for you and which ones are not. The other thing you can do, if you don't like the word toxic, pull the word toxic out and insert the word unhealthy. You get to decide what comes in your life, what stays in your life, and at what level.
Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. Welcome back to the Live Unrestricted podcast. I have a really great guest for you today, and we're talking about toxic relationships. And this came about because a couple of weeks ago, I was DMing with someone on Instagram, and we were talking about her relationship with food. And she was telling me that she struggles a lot with overeating and restrictive eating and guilt and shame, which are very classic signs of an unhealthy relationship with food. So I just asked her, how would you describe her relationship with food? And she told me that she never thought of herself as having a relationship with food. And maybe you never had before you started listening to this podcast either. And really, we have a relationship with everything in our lives. We have a relationship with work, with our partner, with our family members, with our kids, with food, with exercise, with our body image. And my definition of a relationship is the way that you think, feel, and behave around or with something. So the way that you think, feel, and behave around food is going to encompass your relationship with food. So we actually have a guest expert with us today, Dr. Heidi Brocke, who's a toxic relationship awareness and healing specialist. So after spending 14 years in an extremely emotionally and narcissistically abusive relationship, she broke the chains and turned her past into her passion. She left her 24-year career in healthcare to use her life experience and education to be the person she needed when she herself was trapped in the darkness of an unhealthy relationship, to provide hope, healing, and freedom to those whose lives have been affected by toxic relationships, emotional abuse, and narcissistic behaviors. Wait till you hear her story. It's pretty incredible. It is so interesting. I had so many follow-up questions, but before I play that for you, I'll give you a little bit of a life update. I always feel very uncomfortable talking about my personal life. I think it's because I grew up as the youngest of 5 kids. And so I never really thought my voice was important. I never thought that people cared about what I had to say. That's also a big reason why I always feel really weird and uncomfortable talking about my own story and my own experiences, because there's this voice in my head that will say, no one cares about this, when I know that's not true. And I know that me sharing my experiences, my perspective is so valuable for you. So I am doing my best every day to step out of my comfort zone and let you into my life a little bit more. So I just had a really lovely weekend. So my brother and his now fiance are getting married this year in September. And what's really cool is that his fiance is also a really good friend of mine. We worked together years ago and they started dating afterwards. And they're just such an awesome couple. I'm in the bridal party and they had their friends' engagement party over the weekend, and it was après ski themed. So if you're Canadian or you live somewhere where there's snow and skiing, then you might be familiar with what après ski is, which is, I'm not a skier, so I can't really define it, but I think it's when everyone is done skiing, they kind of get together at the bar at the ski hill and just party afterwards. So that was their theme for the party, which was awesome because everyone got to wear really comfy clothes and very warm socks, which is great for me because I have very terrible circulation in my feet and in my toes. So we got to wear all these like fun outfits and we decorated it so nicely. There was like logs and leaves and skis everywhere and signs. It was just a really beautiful night. And a piece of it that was really awesome too is that there was a table full of food. I mean, chips and candies and desserts and pizzas and pasta salad, all of the fixings. And in the past, I would have, number one, restricted all day long, tried to eat quote unquote clean, eat fewer calories in order to save up my calories so that I can eat as much food as I want and not feel guilty about it later. And what would end up happening is I would go into these events so hungry that I would end up eating so much, overeating, and being fixated on the food the entire night. And you may have experienced this before yourself when going to a social event where you have saved up your calories and you end up going there ravenous and all you can think about is food and you're having conversations with people, but you're not really present because your eyes are on that buffet table. And it ends up being really hard to fully engage in those situations because food is a primal need. And so your body will send signals to you through thoughts about food and your stomach growling and shakiness and a headache in order to get that fuel, that energy that you need. So what I do now when I go to these events where I know food is going to be there, I don't change my eating habits whatsoever. I eat the normal breakfast, normal lunch, normal dinner, my snacks. I don't eat less. I don't save up my calories. I don't try to not eat fun foods or only eat like low carb, quote unquote, healthy foods, because I know that if I were to restrict, I am more likely to overeat later, to not enjoy my time at this party, to be fixated on food instead of being present with the people that I love. And because I know that I can have those foods whenever I want, I can have pizza and pasta salad and chocolate and cupcakes and cookies. I can have them whenever I want. There's not this urgent need to eat them just because they're there. Like, this is the only time that I'm going to be able to eat these foods. So gotta take advantage of this opportunity. None of that happens. So food freedom is not about just eating whatever you want, whenever you want. Actually, that's not the definition of food freedom at all. It's about knowing and respecting your own body cues, being able to eat in a way that nourishes your body, and being able to live a life where food is part of it. It is something that you enjoy. I'm not going to say that I didn't eat any of the food at this party. No, I had two of my friends' delicious cupcakes. I had a couple, I think I had like one piece of pizza, maybe a handful of chocolates. But it was done in a way that felt calm. It felt peaceful. I wasn't eating and thinking, oh, I shouldn't be eating this, and not being able to engage in conversations. It's about being able to live with food as a source of joy, of connection, of pleasure, without feeling like food controls you. Now, when I'm invited to a social event where I know there's going to be food, it doesn't even cross my mind to feel anxious or nervous or trying to plan my day around it. I know exactly what I need to do in order to be there, be present, be mindful, and eat in a way that feels good for me. And I never wake up the next morning feeling uncomfortably bloated because I overate, or guilty or unwell physically. So if you're listening to this right now and you're thinking, God, I would love to be able to do that. I want to be able to go to restaurants or social events and not feel anxious and like food has power over me. Then it's really crucial that you stop and you ask yourself, are my current behaviors and mindsets around food conducive to that kind of life? If I am currently counting calories or doing low carb or obsessing over every single morsel of food that I put into my mouth, is that a possibility for me to be able to live with food with freedom and peace? And if not, then what do I need to do in order to start making my way there? So that's just a little tangent of part of my weekend. I also went to an escape room with Luke and some of our friends, and it was Luke's first time in an escape room. And guys, he loved it so much. He has been asking me to go back to an escape room every day since we went. He really likes video games, and so that kind of acts as like a real life video game. So it was so much fun. We did terribly. We completed it in like an hour and a half with way too many hints. It was a little bit embarrassing, but 10 on 10 would go back. It was not my first escape room. In fact, during university, one of the really random jobs that I had was working at an escape room for a couple of months, which was quite an interesting experience and probably would not do it again. I much prefer what I do now. But yes, let me know. You can send me a DM on Instagram if you've ever done an escape room and what the theme was, and if you enjoyed it, yes or no, because I know that some people really don't enjoy it. I don't understand why. I personally love solving puzzles and mysteries and things like that. So let me know if you've ever been and what your experience was like. But yes, all in all, really fun weekend, starting off Monday strong today, finishing off the day very soon as I just got off my podcast recording with Dr. Heidi. So without further ado, I'm going to play with you our conversation about toxic relationships. And like I said, this can be applied to a toxic relationship with a partner, with food, with exercise, with your body, with a family member, with a friend. So we're going to talk about how to become aware of what is a toxic relationship, how it feels, how it can affect you. What are some of the steps to take in order to get out of a toxic relationship? Why it's so hard to move away from a toxic relationship, to get out of it. And then we end the episode with a really great tangible action step for you to take if you feel like you are currently in a unhealthy relationship, whether that is with a person or with an aspect of your life. This is an action step that you can take with whatever area of your life is being affected by this. So let's play that recording for you with Dr. Heidi Brocke. Well, thank you so much for being here. And today we're talking about the topic of toxic relationships. And this is something that, even though we have not talked about this on the podcast before, can be really related to your relationship with food, body image, self-esteem, boundaries, self-care, all the things. So first of all, thank you so much for being here. And before we get into the topic and talk about your expertise and your experience, can we talk about why it's so important to be aware of toxic relationships, what they look like, what they feel like, and all of that stuff?
Okay, this is where Dr. Heidi says, I'll talk till Tuesday if you let me. So you can just give me the wave or the, I'm glad that you asked me that because I usually start off with that right away. The first thing I like to make sure that, because this isn't my regular audience, I am not a licensed mental health professional. I am a chiropractor acupuncturist by trade. So I just make sure that people know that because I do a ton of education. I don't do any treating or any diagnosing of medical conditions. With that, I love the education part. The education part is basically what freed me from toxic relationships in my life. Not that they don't still find me, but I handle them much, much differently. So because you asked me about toxic, this is my favorite part because it's kind of an eye-opener for a lot of people. This business landed in my lap about 8 years ago. This was not anything that I thought I would be doing ever, if you would have asked me. And as things go, as you know, in your life, things just progress. I'm guessing that's how you got into the same thing, right?
Yep.
And when we talk about toxic, I chose the word toxic back then because toxic is not a diagnosis. Toxic is an adjective that is used to describe any relationship in the status that it's in that may be unhealthy for you mentally, physically, or emotionally. Thus, for the sake of this podcast, your relationship with food, if it is unhealthy for you mentally, physically, or emotionally, is a toxic relationship for you. I used that because it's a blanket phrase. It can be used with any diagnosis, any addiction, any type of anything. And I also used it before toxic was all over social media. And now when you see it on social media, you really are led to believe that it is a diagnosis. And we think that if somebody is toxic for us, they have to check all the boxes of toxic personality. And that's not entirely the case. You have your disorders, you have your diagnoses, you have your addictions, and a lot of those have check boxes. Okay, we know that they're this because they check every box. But when you're in a toxic relationship, whether it be with food or with a person, we still seek validation in the fact that, is this really this bad? Mm-hmm. And in the use of the word toxic, it can be kind of quicksand because we want a checklist. We want to know if it's really this bad, or if we have validation for leaving, or if we, really need to change our behavior. And the truth is, and this is the part that most people miss, if you watch social media right now, you can go on any one of the platforms and you will see the toxic personality does this. They say this, they do this, they say this. And it makes us feel like there have to be a certain description. And in reality, everyone listen, because if you forget everything from this podcast, remember this: you get to decide what relationships in your life are toxic for you and which ones are not. The other thing you can do, if you don't like the word toxic, pull the word toxic out and insert the word unhealthy. You get to decide what comes in your life, what stays in your life, and at what level. So when you're listening to this, really don't think about the toxic entity. Think about you and what you are going to allow in your life, because you ultimately get to make the decision.
Wow, that is such a good start to this conversation, because I know that for me, as you assumed, I struggled with a toxic relationship with food for years. And I always had this mentality that it's not bad enough. It doesn't check all the boxes. I'm not underweight. I don't have all of these check marks from an eating disorder. And you underplay what you're going through. And you just assume that this is probably like relatively normal, or this is what other people are going through. And I love that you said, like, tune into how you feel. If it doesn't feel good for you physically, mentally, emotionally, then it is toxic and it is time to make a change.
Mm-hmm. And when we say make a change, it doesn't mean you have to eliminate stuff from your life. It just means you have to change the relationship you have with it, or change the way you interact or react to it.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how did you get into this work?
So this is the question that everyone likes to hear. And this is the question that I don't like to talk about. It's not that I don't like to talk about it. It's just like, oh, here we go. Now we got to talk about this. So I always start by saying I grew up in a little Christian community in Bozeman, Montana.
Wow.
And up until 3 years ago, nobody knew where Bozeman was, but now Yellowstone has made it very famous. Yes, I grew up in Bozeman. And my dad was the prison chaplain for a few years, and my grandpa was a preacher, and I went to a Christian school, and I saw the same people for the first 18 years of my life. And from my perspective, everybody had your best interest in mind, right? Everybody, watched out for everybody. Again, that was from my perspective. Me looking back on that community now, it's just like every other community. But I think I left that community to go to grad school with the thought that everybody was like that community was on the surface. And I didn't ever expect that there was people out there that had different relationship goals than I did. And it was when I was at chiropractic school that I met my former husband. And this could be the Talk Till Tuesday story. So I'm going to make it super short. I did not want to go on the first date with him. There was something in my stomach that said, oh, I don't like that feeling. I don't like that. But I chose healthcare because my personality is the kind, caring, loving, giving, fix-it supporter, peacekeeper, conflict avoider. Mm-hmm. Oh, let me help, let me support. I want to be there for people. And if I didn't have that personality, I wouldn't have chose that. If you didn't have that personality, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So I know that you and I are probably pretty similar in that case also. And so by the third or fourth time I was asked out, I started feeling guilty, and I started feeling like the bad person. And so, okay, fine, I'll go on a date. Well, I didn't want to go on a second date any more than I wanted to go on a third date. And long story short, I got engaged. I got pregnant. I got married. I had another baby. I bought a business and 12 years married, divorced for 2 years. At 14 years, 2 years after I was divorced, I had to run away. And in doing so, I had really tried everything that I could to change the dynamics so that I could stay around the kids and we could try and raise the kids together. I was working with him every day from all day long in the same office. The way the paperwork read, which I was so ready to get out of the marriage, I really didn't care at that point. And he had worked a bunch of loopholes into the paperwork that now I don't let a client miss when we go through the paperwork together. Mm-hmm. But basically what I did after 2 years of trying to, buy him out, get him to buy me out, make the changes, I finally signed everything over to him and I moved 4 hours away by myself. So he kept the kids initially, but ended up keeping my kids for 5 years from me. And that was the most difficult time of my life. They were 11 and 13 when I left. I have 2 daughters. I moved to right by St. Louis, which is where I live now. And I started a new life, a doctor with no practice, no patients. I had zero money. Found out later he had taken out credit cards in my name. So I was actually $50,000 in debt when I moved. I didn't have kids. I didn't have friends. I did have my new boyfriend, and he was the reason I ended up coming to St. Louis, not knowing I was in love with him. I just knew that something in him made me realize there was something better out there for me than what I had. And so I just took the leap. And 5 years later, my daughters also ran away at 17 and 19, and they're grown now, and our relationships are great. There was, for a while, I didn't think I would ever have them. But I started a new chiropractic office, and I was probably 18 years into chiropractic at that point. And everyone knows you go through burnout in a job. And I was literally going, yeah, whatever, get on the table. I could adjust people in the dark with my eyes shut. And I know that when I get to that point, especially when I was practicing as a primary care physician, you can't continue to practice that way because it doesn't do your patients any good. Mm-hmm. And so I had learned through the years that when I started feeling like that, I had to change something. So I started doing women's retreats on making yourself a priority. But I never talked about my former life when I was in it because, one, nobody understands emotional abuse. And you can vouch probably the same thing. The struggle that you had with food, as much as you tried to explain your emotional tie with food, nobody really understood it. And so then you just feel more alone and you feel more trapped in it. I didn't talk about it when I moved because how was I supposed to explain that I had left a relationship and left 2 teenage daughters 4 hours away? And so I didn't talk about it. And in the first couple of retreats, I didn't talk about it either until the third retreat. Some questions came up and I just started using examples from my former relationship. And I remember covering my mouth going, oh my gosh, because the minute anybody hears abuse, their view of you completely switches. Well, I kind of let my guard down in that retreat. And I realized that everybody that was coming to those retreats for making yourself a priority was coming out of emotionally abusive relationships. And that was kind of my calling, I guess, that I was needed in this area. And now 9 years later, I'm completely retired from healthcare. I've been doing this full time now since 2020.
Wow, that is such an interesting story. And I guess my first question would be, why do you think that so many people stay in abusive relationships for so long?
So I don't do a ton with domestic violence because there's a lot of resources out there for domestic violent recovery and, help. I do a lot with the emotionally abusive relationship because people do not understand that. I did not understand that when I was in it. I thought emotional abuse was yelling and screaming. Mm-hmm. But after 6 months in that, you can chalk it up to, that's just how he is. It's just how he is. And, being in a relationship like that is like walking into a room that stinks. If you stay in the room, the smell goes away. Yeah. And it's not because the room doesn't stink. It's because your body goes, that stinks way too bad. We're going to desensitize those nerve endings so she doesn't have to smell this the whole time she's in there. Mm-hmm. And when you're in an emotionally abusive relationship, which I'll explain that in a little bit, but your body basically says there's no way that she's going to withstand this much emotional pain. So we desensitize her. So you'll hear people talk about how they feel numb. They're not really happy. They're not really sad. They don't care. It's because the body has desensitized so that their feelings don't go up and down so much because you can't take that much emotional whiplash that fast. But by my definition, I make my own definitions up, by the way, since I own my own business. I can do that. We can do anything.
Yeah, I love that.
And I like to put things in words that people can understand. Mm-hmm. So my definition of emotional abuse is when someone uses your emotions or your feelings. If you don't relate to the word emotions, when you hear me say it, just put in the word feelings. When someone uses your feelings to get what they need. So the toxic personality will say and do things to get us to feel a certain way. If they can say or do something that makes us happy, happy is an emotion, sad is an emotion, upset's an emotion, frustration's an emotion, anger is an emotion, guilt is an emotion, and guilt is the emotion that will get you every time. I left my former 6 times in the span of the 14 years. And 2 of the times, all he had to say was, I can't believe you're breaking up the family. And I went, and I felt so guilty. I didn't take 2 seconds to go over the reasons I left. I just couldn't get the guilt of breaking up the family out of my head. And the fastest way to get rid of the feeling of guilt is to do whatever they want you to do, because then that feeling of guilt goes away. And so that's an example of how the emotional abuser controls your emotions. They want you emotionally dependent on them. So all they have to do is change what they say or do. So you feel a certain way, because we are emotionally wired. We just talked about that. We do everything through emotion, right? We're not the ones getting up going, oh, I'm so glad I have the 8:30 a.m. pedicure, right? We're the ones going, oh, well, the 8:30 p.m. pedicure that's been on the schedule for 18 months is going to have to get canceled because somebody needs me. Mm-hmm. And so they know that if they can play with your emotions, they can get you to feel, so you will act however they need to. And so when we talk about the emotional abuse aspect, it's the control that the toxic entity, be it a substance, be it an addiction or a person, has over you because of the emotional tie that you have to it. So the reason you stay so long is, 1, they're in control of your emotions. 2, because we're emotionally wired, we take our marriage vows seriously. There was a lot of faith-based belief in me staying. Nobody in my family had ever been divorced. I'm still the only one divorced. I'm the only one that have kids that has tattoos. I'm the only one that has kids that smoke. Now they call me crazy Aunt Heidi, and I'll totally embrace it. But, it's just, you don't want people to look at you like you're the crazy one that cannot stay in control of her life. So, you kind of play it down.
You don't want to go against the norms.
Yeah. And we're, when you're controlled by other people, you really are concerned about what they see in you. Mm-hmm. You really want to be accepted. And I think that was another reason why I stayed. If you know anything about what they call the love bombing stage, in the beginning of a toxic relationship, they love everything about you. They're very accepting. And for us being emotional, we can't believe how accepting they are. And we've never been accepted like this before. So even though it may feel like it's moving fast, they love our hair and they love our family and they love our clothes and they love that we're financially independent, that we have our own friends. And then as soon as you emotionally invest in the relationship by getting a dog together or moving in together or getting engaged or getting married or getting pregnant or, buying a house, that makes us emotionally invested. And us that are emotionally wired are going to have a lot harder time stepping out of it once we've emotionally invested in it. So the love bombing stage is set by the toxic person to get you to emotionally invest and to believe that they're trustworthy.
Would you say that's kind of like the sunk cost fallacy? Like, I've already invested this much time and energy into it and feelings and emotions that might as well just stick it out.
Yes. I have no idea what the sunk cost fallacy is, but I'm going to look it up when we get off here. Yeah. Yes, I do think that. And we don't want to disappoint, because when we disappoint somebody, that takes the acceptance factor away. Mm-hmm. So we take it upon ourselves to change ourselves so that we feel like we fit better in the relationship. For those of you who can see me, you can see that I have very dark hair. 3 weeks after I married my former, this is just an example, he said he was really disappointed because his whole life he planned on marrying a blonde. And so for 12 years, it was, put some more highlights in your hair, put some more highlights in your hair. I remember the day I looked in the mirror and I did not recognize myself. I am loud. I am outgoing. I'm obnoxious. I'm crazy. I'm extroverted as they come. I have almost black hair. I have a big mouth. I'm very charismatic. And the day I looked in the mirror, I was almost blonde. I never smiled. I never laughed. I never talked. I don't think I even looked up unless a patient was there to see me.
Wow. And I'm going to go ahead and assume the answer is yes, but Well, first of all, how old were you when you first got into this relationship?
I was 23.
Okay. Do you feel like you had a
Now
sense?
everybody's doing the math because they're trying to figure out how old I am.
Do you feel like you had a sense of who you were, what your values were, what kind of life you wanted, and self-esteem before you got in this relationship?
Oh, totally. I'd moved from Montana to Iowa by myself to go to grad school. I was living by myself in a city I knew no one. I jumped in my little car with my plant strapped in the passenger seat, and I was ready to conquer the world. I thought that I would head back to Montana after I graduated, but I met him there and then we lived in Iowa. But the toxic personality or your emotionally abusive person, they steal your identity. You slowly disappear in those relationships because the things that they liked about you in the beginning are the same things that they criticize you after you've invested.
Mhm.
And so my strong personality, he didn't like that I was loud. He didn't like that I had friends. He isolated me from my family. That's another emotional abuse kind of segue bullet point. But basically, if you don't know who you are, they basically can tell you who you are. They instill a lot of self-doubt so you don't dare make decisions. You ask their advice on things. If you're asking their advice on your life decisions, they're pretty much in control of your life. This is just an example of how they instill self-doubt. You go to the beauty shop to get your hair trimmed because it's spring and we've got winter split ends and you've been wearing it in a messy bun forever. And so you go to the beauty shop and when you're there, you think, oh my gosh, I'm just going to chop it all off. Since it's spring, I just need a new hairdo. So you chop it all off. You guys all know the minute you've had long hair and you chop it off, you like it for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But
And then you regret it instantly.
right. But the 2 weeks that you like it, it's because, oh, it's not stuck to my head and I can curl it and I actually have a style. So you go back all confident that you have this new hairstyle, and the toxic personality might say something like, I told you I only like you with long hair. Okay, well, that's immediately going to make you feel like you made the wrong decision. It's going to immediately make you feel like you're no longer accepted. It's going to immediately make you feel like you disappointed them. So now the next time you go to the beauty shop, you don't say, how does Heidi want to wear her hair? You say, how do I think they want me to wear my hair? Or I couldn't order off of a menu by the time I left. And it wasn't because he was telling me what to order. It was, how come you're having chicken? Or don't you think that's too expensive? So at 35 years old, I'm waiting to see what he's ordering, waiting to see what the price point is. And then I'm ordering something I don't even want in hopes that it won't get criticized. So when you asked about values and self-esteem and self-confidence, all of those are robbed from you because if you don't have any sense of who you are, they can pretty much control you. One of the things that I like to tell people is I am not a liar. I try to lie, and either if my conscience doesn't get me, my face will tell the truth, right? I can't even fib. I can't even tell a joke trying to make it not like a joke without people knowing. But I've always said, honesty is one of my values. Honesty is one of my values. I lived with a cheater for 14 years. So if I'm going to hold honesty as my value, my life is not reflecting my values. So what I did is I altered my values to fit the relationship. You'll change your religious views, you'll change your political views, you'll change your morals and your ethics, just so you can decrease the conflict and increase the peace in that relationship.
And I can absolutely see how that plays out in all these different areas of life, because one of my big rock bottoms was realizing that my disordered eating, my body image, my obsession with food and my body was stopping me from living a life in alignment with my values, which was traveling, my family, being present with my friends, experiencing all these amazing activities in my life. And I was just isolating myself and shrinking my world because I was trying so hard to shrink myself. And recognizing it creates such a cognitive dissonance when you recognize that you say you have all of these values. You say all of these things are important to you, but your life and your actions and your behaviors are not reflecting that.
Well, I think that that's true, but I think a lot of times we're the only ones that realize that.
Mm-hmm.
Because we learn to be very good actresses, and you were a very good actress when you were struggling with your relationship with food.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody knew the depths of it. And when I was in high school, I did have about a 6-month bad relationship with food, and it had to do with the track team, and we did win the state record and we held it forever, and it kind of had to do with that. But the emotional control that food can have over you because of your body image is no different no different than a toxic personality.
Mhm.
The toxic personality seeks out personalities like us, the kind, caring, loving, giving, conflict avoiders, because they feel more secure when they feel power over something. They feel more secure when they're in control of something. They want the attention. That's what makes them feel secure. So our personalities are actually targets.
Mhm.
So our personality is also the personality that is going to fall into something like the dysregulation of the relationship with food. And if you think about your relationship with food or any of your listeners, it controls you. It has power over you. When you're not around it, or you're not thinking about it, or you've done something that you regret, where is your attention? It's on it.
Yeah.
And so it's the same exact concept as a toxic relationship in your life that is with a person as a substance or an addiction of some type.
Yeah, 100%. Something I hear all the time is, I don't even know who I am anymore. I feel
Well,
like I
I've
have
said that
no
1,000 times.
personality. I have no personality. Even when I'm with my partner or with my friends, I'm a shell of a human because, like you said, 95% of your brain space is focused on how you look and what you're eating, how many calories are in your food. And so that leaves very little room for the you that you're actually supposed to be.
And if you think about the you that you're actually supposed to be, your view of yourself has changed so much that it wouldn't matter how perfect you looked or how perfect you felt or how perfect you handled things. You would assume that people were judging you. And the minute you feel like people are judging you or people are talking about you or you're the last one to know something, you will isolate yourself. It's way easier for us to stay in a room with a refrigerator than it is for us to have to go through that feeling of rejection or disapproval.
Yes, 100%. I cannot tell you the amount of times as I was first working on recovering from my eating disorder and I was doing a lot of work on body image and being okay with gaining weight, that there'd be days where I didn't have a good body image day, and getting myself to leave the house and go to the restaurant or see a friend where there might be pictures being taken. I didn't want to do that. I would much rather stay home and isolate and not feel that discomfort. But when you push yourself to do that, and when you make yourself slightly uncomfortable, that's when you actually start exposing yourself to these things that you think will be threatening to your safety, threatening to your identity. And you realize, oh, I actually had a lot of fun. It wasn't that bad. I was able to be there and be present.
I think too, what we fear, the more power we give and the more attention we give to our fears, the bigger they get.
Yeah.
So it's easier for us to stay in a room than to have to face our fears. Because when you think about, and I'm sure that this is how you felt, when you thought about making a change, when you thought about all of the stuff you were going to have to go through and the pain and the mental struggle and the depressive feelings and the anxiousness, that doesn't look fun to you.
No.
And it's always easier to stay in something that's familiar than to step into something that you don't know. And that is why 90% of my private clients stay in the relationships as long as they do, because they have learned how to function in that relationship. And stepping out of that relationship, they're not sure how to function. There's so many what ifs.
I could not agree more. I see this all the time where I get on calls with women. They cry to me for an hour about how much their relationship with food and with their bodies is affecting every single area of their life and have been for 10, 15, 20 years, decades. And even when we have a solution, even when we know what we should be doing to move forward, we see the pain of change as bigger than the pain of staying where we are. We would much prefer being in a familiar discomfort than an unfamiliar discomfort temporarily that will give you the rest of your life of freedom and happiness.
Yep. I always tell people you are going to stay when the fear of leaving or the fear of changing is greater than the fear of staying where you are. And you will leave when the fear of staying where you are is greater than the fear of changing.
Yes. Now that we've talked about kind of the warning signs and why we stay, I want to move the conversation to some action steps, because what you do with your clients and what I do with my clients is probably very similar, even though in two different industries. But when you're working with your clients who have that tremendous fear of leaving, of change, how do you get them through that? What are some of the first steps to get someone to take action towards freedom?
So again, I always tease people that I make stuff up, but all of the information I have, none of it is scientific. This is all based off of my experience and my experience of clients that have been going through this. I didn't know this when I was in it. The day that I figured all this out, I remember thinking, you have got to be kidding me. This is so freaking easy. But let's just say this. When you're trying to make a decision on making a change and you sit on the fence, I run a group for people who are on the fence, off the fence. When you're trying to make that decision of making a change, chances are you are trying to make it with half of the information. And the analogy I use is, okay, let's just pretend that your boss comes to you and says, I have a job promotion for you. Your desk or your office will be in the last office on the left, and your lunch hour is from 2:30 to 3:30, and you have to wear red pants, but you have to tell me by tomorrow morning at 8:30 if you want it, and then they leave. How are you going to make the decision if you want that job promotion based on the information he gave? You don't know what the job description is. You don't know what the pay is. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know why you're wearing red pants.
Mm-hmm.
So 8:30 in the morning will roll around and you'd say, I can't make the decision based on the information you gave me.
Mm-hmm.
And usually that's what we're up against. You and I see the world through emotionally wired eyes. So when you look at a toxic personality in your life or someone you believe is unhealthy for you, how many times have you thought, how come you can't just act normal?
So many times.
Right. And then what we do is we think, well, if we just talk to them, if we just have a conversation. And then if you've been in it for a while, you know, you have to wait till they're in a good mood and you have to choose the right words and you have to have the right tone of voice and you have to have brushed your teeth 37 minutes before and you have to have the right color on and you have to, right? And you've carried around this pain in your stomach for 3 weeks, knowing that you have to have this conversation, but because they're not acting normal, we have to have the conversation. So we sit down, have the conversation. 3 hours later, the conversation's completely turned upside down. We are now apologizing, wishing we never started the conversation, and it's done. And our thought process when we started that conversation was, if we just have this conversation, they're going to all of a sudden get it. It's going to sink in. And tomorrow morning, they're going to wake up and they're going to act normal, which is acting like us, right? You and I only see the world through emotionally wired eyes. When we look at the toxic personality and think, how come you can't just act normal? It's because they're not acting like us and we wouldn't do and say the things that they do and say. But for the personality they are given, they are acting 100% normal, which is why there is a huge disconnect in the communication. So when you say, how do you get these people to be able to make a decision or to realize what you're talking about? You will never understand the situation until you can see everything through the toxic person's eyes. So what I teach is I teach how the toxic person operates, because you only know how to operate like an emotionally wired person.
Mm-hmm.
So then when you have the information you have from being emotionally wired, and you have the information that they have and their goals in the relationship, then you can see the whole picture. And then and only then can you make a decision on staying in the relationship or leaving the relationship. So I work with people at any stage. If they're just learning, if they've decided they're leaving, if they're in the divorce process, if they're co-parenting, I do a ton of self-discovery, which I'm certain that you do a ton of that too, because you have to refine yourself. But somebody who's been in a toxic relationship, their personality is a target. This is not the last toxic person that is going to find them. And so I always tease, you are going to know how the toxic personality operates so well that you'll be able to take my job next year. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But you have to be able to think the way they think. Now, I get pretty defensive of the toxic person. I don't use the word narcissist hardly ever, because right now, narcissist is the word of the decade.
The word of the year.
Everybody, when I was in chiropractic in the 90s, the word was fibromyalgia, and then it was gluten intolerance, and then it was peanut allergy, and now everyone's a narcissist. And I stay away from that because narcissistic personality disorder is a mental health diagnosis.
Yeah.
And in that case, the toxic personality, whether they have a diagnosis, whether they have an addiction, whether they had a traumatic upbringing, it doesn't make the relationship any healthier for you. And so if they're a grown adult, they're responsible for the things that made them the way they are. But the toxic personality makes other people responsible for giving them the things that they need to feel secure. So they didn't ask to be like this. Something in their past or through what they have been through in their life has developed an insecure personality that makes them reach out to personalities like us.
Yeah. And what you said about being able to look at life through someone else's eyes is something that can be so difficult, because sometimes we don't want to have that understanding. We don't want to think about why they're doing the things that they do because they're just hurting us. And this is something that I'm constantly working through, even in my own very healthy relationship, because no matter what, you're never going to have the same background, history, mindset as the person that you're with. And you need to be able to see how they think and their goals and their values in order to have a true conversation, two-way conversation.
Yes, and wouldn't that be lovely? Because I've been married for almost 12 years and been together for, oh, geez, almost 16 years. I would marry this man every single day of my life. He saved my life from my former. But when I have ups and downs with emotional abuse triggers and post-traumatic stress, he doesn't understand it. And I want him so badly to understand it. And it doesn't matter what video I make him watch or how many times I explain it. If you haven't been in the situation that I've been in, you won't know how it feels. If people haven't been in the situation that you've been in, you can't make them feel what you're feeling. And that can be very frustrating. And I did about 13 years very, very, very well with no triggers. And then it's always the Lord. The Lord throws something my way and goes, okay, now you got to go through this. And I'm like,
yes.
And I had a couple years in about the past 3 that I started having a lot of post-traumatic episodes. Well, my poor husband has never seen this. And so in his eyes, he's like, what in the world? And things were changing. He's a little bit midlife right now. So he's a little crabbier. And, there was just a lot of stuff. And immediately my survival mode came back. And the insecurity of what if he's leaving? What if he's cheating? My husband is so in love with me. It's ridiculous. When I can wrap my head around the concept that, oh, you really think he's cheating? It makes me laugh at myself almost. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that you have the same thing when you're thrown into that old feeling of, I have to survive. Your body doesn't know the difference. Your body just goes, this is how I kept you alive the last time you were here. This is what we're doing. And so I get thrown into this after 13 years of a very healthy recovery. I was so pissed off for the first year that I couldn't even wrap my head around the fact that I had to do something about it, and I'm certain that the listeners, you are allowed to have a pity party, but you're not allowed to have a pity party for a year. Mm-hmm. I can't believe I have to go through this. Haven't I been through enough? Can't, the whole God doesn't give you anything more you can handle. I'm like, can't he just distribute it a little bit? Like, can't we just even it out? And I was having a big pity party. And finally, I realized you're the only one that can fix this. And I was wanting my husband to help carry the load and wanting my daughters to help carry the load. And finally, I was like, here I go again. And I'm not kidding you. I knew what I was looking for was the somatic rewiring.
Yeah.
I knew that my brain had gone back into survival mode after it had been out. So I knew what I was looking for. And as soon as I found it, I latched onto it like nothing. And the last year has been fantastic. Mm. But I'm not kidding you. 6 months after that, here comes 2 clients of mine. And sure enough, I had to go through exactly what I went through in order to be able to lead them through the next phase of their thing. And, we don't like to be vulnerable to our clients. We're out here talking on global podcasts, and in our head, we're like, well, we better not say anything wrong because then people will quit listening to us. Mm-hmm. Well, here I am going through this disaster for 18 months. And so I was skipping recording podcasts, and all of a sudden I thought, you know what? I'm doing them a disservice by not allowing them to know that I'm going through this. So I started getting very transparent. And of course, I was bawling on the podcast and blah, all that. And after I kind of got back on my feet, then my husband actually did 4 episodes with me and explained, kind of his point of view on how it is to be in love with someone that's going through something that he didn't understand. And I know he wants to understand it because if you have a male personality in your life, they just want to fix it.
Yeah.
Here, can I buy you a new pair of high heels? Do you feel better? And so that was the struggle. And it was one of those things I had to do it myself. And anybody listening to this, I know how hard the relationship that you have with, if it's food, if it's other substances, if it's a person, I know how hard it is to just pick yourself up every morning and keep pushing because it gets tiring. But when you look behind you and you look at all the people that might just need your help, even if you're not in the same realm as us, we chose this for a living now. Like this is what we chose to do. But I always tell the beauticians, you have females in your chair all day long. And when you go through something shitty like this, sorry, I just swore, I'll tell my dad.
No, that's totally fine.
Dad, don't listen to this one. You don't know who you're going to help by what you go through. So everybody who's listening, there's somebody out there that is going to be grateful that you're going through what you went through.
Yes. And what you said about wanting someone else to do it for you, someone else to be able to fix it. This is something I hear so often from my listeners and my community is, my husband doesn't get it. He doesn't struggle with food. He will just like decide that he wants to go on a diet and he'll lose weight and have a six pack within a couple of weeks. And so when you're on the other side of that and you're not able to communicate what it's like to be thinking about food 24/7 and to literally feel like it's something that takes over every aspect of your life, no amount of words can you communicate that to someone who has never gone through it. And it is, unfortunately, your responsibility to save yourself.
I know, and
no one else will do it.
There's nothing you want to hear less than you have to do it yourself. When your loved ones are telling you you have to do it yourself, you feel betrayed, you feel forgotten. And I remember after about 18 months, my husband said, I can't fix this. I want to fix it, but I can't. You have to do it. And I, again, was mad, probably only for about 6 hours, though, because I knew he was right. I just didn't want to freaking do it. I've put in so much work already. I was tired of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it gets very wearisome, but I will tell you, when you continue to push yourself, knowing that you have what you need inside of you, it gets better and better. And you become the person that you need to become or that you were supposed to become. And you know what? That some people argue that, oh no, you can be healed. I will forever be on a journey of healing.
That's what I always explain to my clients when they first start the program. I used to really want my Food Freedom Academy to be the last program you ever have to invest in. That used to be my mentality. I really wanted it to be the last program. And after doing it, and I've invested thousands of dollars into coaching for myself, and it will never end, coaching, therapy, constantly. And I realized that like, no, actually, this is your first step. Because once you get like that little bug of personal development and you start working on yourself, you realize how much better it can get. And you realize that it never ends. And I used to run away from challenges. I used to not want to fail. I used to not want to go through hardships. And what I realized over the years, you probably know, growing a business, not easy. It will pull out a lot of your triggers and it will test you constantly. And I realized that every time I got through something, every time I had to push through a trigger or push through me getting in my own way, I became a better coach, because the things that you learn about yourself can be translated, because human beings, we all work kind of in the same way, which is we're always trying to survive. We're always trying to keep ourselves safe and comfortable.
Yes, and safe and comfortable isn't always where you get somewhere.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping this up, for anyone who might be either in a toxic relationship with a partner, a toxic relationship with food, with their bodies, with work, with a substance.
I work with a ton of people who have toxic family members.
Oh, yes.
Friendships.
Yes. Family members as well. And I know that this is broad because you can have toxic relationships with so many different aspects of your life. But if someone was walking away, I really like to end with like an action step, something tangible that they can walk away with. If someone is walking away from this podcast and is like, okay, what is one first step? What is one thing that I can do? I can journal on, an action step. What would you recommend?
I think what I would recommend is when we are talking about, you know, making the change, staying or leaving, cutting something out of our life, we dwell so much on should I or shouldn't I, should I or shouldn't I, shouldn't I or shouldn't I. There's no wrong decision. If you make a decision that doesn't work out, you just make another one. So if people want a journaling point, I would write this down. Whether it's a relationship with food, whether it's a person, whether it's no matter what the relationship struggle is, if nothing in this relationship changes, if it stays exactly like it is today, is this where I want to be for the rest of my life? Because that puts the thought process back on what you want in your life and takes the power away from the toxic entity.
Yes, that is such a good question, because I always make people reflect on like when you're 80 years old and you look back on your life, will you feel happy, content, fulfilled, joyful if you keep living this way? Or will you feel regret that you didn't make a change earlier? And when you take that lens of like the rest of your life, because we're so stuck in instant gratification and short-term thinking, and what do I do for the next 3 months that's going to be comfortable and give me fast results? we don't think about the long-term effects of our decisions. So I think that's a really great starting point for a journaling question.
Yes. And if you answer no to that, write some thoughts behind it, but realize if you answer no, this is not what I want to be in for the rest of my life, you can start the next day to make changes.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't need to go from 0 to 100. I always talk about take an inspired action, whatever that might be, to start looking up new accounts or to start educating yourself or to whatever that looks like for you. What is one action step that I can start taking towards a new direction for my life?
Now that's tricky too. I know that you were wanting to wrap up, but that's tricky too, because when you've been in a relationship that's not healthy for you, nobody's asked you what you want in your life. Nobody's asked you what makes you happy. Nobody's asked what your hobbies are. So when you tell people, or when I tell people, well, let's find a new hobby. What do you want to do? I don't know. You've been following other people around or following the toxic habit around for so long that when you sit down to write a list of what you want more in your life, it's who knows what.
You've never had the chance to even think about what you want for yourself.
Right. And so, when through the self-discovery, and I'm sure you do that, that's a lot of the questions we ask. Well, what do you want? I had a 53-year-old lady call me once and had no idea what her favorite color was.
Wow.
And as it ended up, she had called me about her mother was her toxic person, had chosen all of her colors when she was little, all of her school photograph clothing, her prom dress, her homecoming dress, her wedding colors, her house decoration colors, all her baby's nursery colors. She had no idea what her favorite color was. Now, before we were done, she had decided on it. It was purple. She was so excited. She had a favorite color. Of course, I said, of course, everybody over 50, your favorite color has to be purple, right?
I'm under 50 and my favorite color is purple, so I get it.
No, I'm over 50 and mine is not. Mine is lime green, and it has been lime green since I think I was 2. I should probably look that up. But yes, for those of you who are out there feeling defeated, we were both defeated too. And there's days that we still feel like that. But if we can do it, you can do it. Yeah. Because even though you hear our voice and you think that we're all the way healed and we're all the way through it, we've got all of our shit together, we don't. As soon as I'm off of this, I'm going to go throw my hair in an awful messy bun and put yoga pants on, just like everyone else is out there. So if we can do it, you can do it. And if you're looking for help, either of us are available.
Yes. So I do want you to be able to share where anyone can connect with you and find you if they want to know more or work with you.
So probably the easiest way to find me is my podcast. It's called It's Not Normal, It's Toxic, which you, my dear, are going to be a guest on tomorrow.
Yes.
And my website is Coaching with Dr. Heidi. If you are questioning whether you're in a relationship that might be unhealthy for you, there's something on the website called the Toxicity Profile Analysis. It's very lengthy. There's a reason that it's lengthy. It's 106 questions. They're just yes or no. But I use it for 2 things. For those of you who have been in a longstanding relationship, much of the behaviors become normal. And so just reading through those questions will be validating that maybe you need to think about it more. The results I get are different than the results you get. So if people call to talk to me, each one of those questions correlates to one of the 21 characteristics of the toxic person that I teach. So before I'd ever talk to you on the phone, I'd already know what type of personality you're dealing with. But just for your own validation, if you're thinking you're in a relationship that's unhealthy, you don't ever have to talk to me by going on the website and taking that quiz. But a lot of times that helps. And I do private coaching, and I have a lot of groups going year round also.
Amazing. So I'm going to put all of those links in the show notes so that it's easy to find. And thank you so much. Like you said, I could talk to you until Tuesday. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you, Heidi. And thank you to all of you listeners for being here. And I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magnan Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.